A Butterfly in the Dark by Darren Martin. Edited by Carmen Brewer. If you tear the wings off of a fly, then it's not a fly anymore. It's something else. There's something beautiful about that. Something beautiful and something terrible. In its dying moments, it struggles to be something which it might have been all along, had it not been for the wings. People think flight is such a gift. They forget that birds envy the ground. Chapter 1. Gina Marie Avellino. Gina Marie Avellino was the first girl who went missing, and like many of these firsts, her body was found last. There would be others to follow, but the case itself wouldn't really begin in earnest until her body was found. There were 7 other bodies found by the time they discovered the remains of Gina Marie. 7 other women. 8 other lives. Jealousy by Gin Blossoms played on the radio as her yellow 1992 Jeep Wrangler went zooming past a road sign which said, Route 138, Pear Blossom Highway. Inside, a strikingly beautiful yet modestly dressed down brunette hid behind a mess of bangs and wayfarers. Her rosy red lips were a stark contrast to the monochromatic tufts of hair and black-on-black Ray-Bans, while her buttermilk skin seemed to illuminate her face with fluorescent clarity. She was going for Demi Moore, but it was maybe more of a Pat Benatar. Either way, a beautiful and intelligent woman is driving carelessly down the highway, singing along to her cassette player, a mere 50 miles outside of LA. We don't know her yet, but we can tell that she's having a bad day. She reaches across the dash, her arm meandering through a scattered assortment of tapes. Michael Bolton, Madonna, Whitney Houston are all passed over for a pack of Marlboro Reds. While driving with one hand, Gina Marie deftly removes a single cigarette. Upon retrieval, Miss Avellino discovers that her pack is now empty. She makes a mental note.
Shit,
she muttered to herself. The cigarette dangled from her lips, undulating up and down, moving opposite of her mouth as she sang along. Hey, jealousy. Hey, jealousy. The chorus was suddenly interrupted by a vibration in her pocket. 2 short, abrupt buzzes, followed by a silence that begged the question, what was that? Gina looked down at her side to see her beeper flashing with a new message which simply read, Please call, Mom. While looking down, Gina sighed at the prospect of calling her mother, but by her expression, you could tell that this had been a long time coming. She shook her head reluctantly, as if mulling over some decision. After another moment, she put her beeper down and turned her attention back to the road. Her headlights illuminated the road ahead, revealing a gaunt coyote in the center of the lane. She slammed on the brakes, activating the anti-lock braking system. The wheels began cycling through a synchronized series of brake patterns in perfectly engineered unanimity. Gina pulled the wheel as hard as she could, nearly flipping her Jeep while trying to avoid the carnivorous canine. The car screeched to a halt, turning a perfect 90 degrees before it settled to a complete stop. Gina, nearly hyperventilating, struggled to catch her breath while the music persisted in the background, almost mockingly. After another moment, she shut off the radio and sat in silence as she continued to catch her breath. She was so overcome with adrenaline that she wasn't even startled when she peered out of her driver's side window to see the coyote still standing there in the stillness of the night. The girl and the coyote held each other's glance for a moment before the animal lost interest and sauntered off into the darkness. After she caught her breath, Gina remained seated for a minute, acknowledging the surreal moment that just took place. The interaction seemed to have an ominous, foreboding quality to it, but Gina couldn't quite put her finger on it. After she finally caught her breath, Miss Avellino shrugged and put the transmission back into drive. She was about to pull away when a sign up ahead caught her eye. Cigarettes, beer, gas. Gina looked down at the empty packet of cigarettes and a small smile emerged across her face, as if there was some silver lining to her minor misfortune. The smell of burnt rubber permeated into the cab, making nose hairs stand on end as she accelerated away toward the small, unassuming gas station. As the car drove away, a small tumbleweed passed by, unaware of Gina or the coyote. A bell by the door greeted her as she entered. She was met by a flood of yellow-stained fluorescent light and the hot sting of buzzing appliances. The ice machine, an oscillating fan, and the fountain soda machine all greeted her with vibrating, thoughtless moans. The station was completely empty, and she felt oddly uneasy for a moment. She panned across the landscape of junk food and half-empty shelves, searching for life. She was startled when she suddenly saw the cold eyes of James Archibald Knox, staring back at her from behind the counter. He didn't flinch, didn't blink.
"Hello,"
said Gina Marie, sheepishly.
"Hi,"
replied the strange man in a raspy, high-pitched voice. He didn't move, and he didn't take his eyes off of her. He simply stared without flinching, forgetting to breathe. Suddenly, she was hesitant to take another step. For all she knew, he had been moving behind her back this whole time, playing red light, green light every time she took a step, and this was simply the first time she took stock of him. If she turned her head again, who knows what he might do? She imagined him stepping out from behind the counter, mirroring her every move, as the two moved closer together, like partners engaged in an unspoken waltz. She froze, unable to utter a single word or commit another step.
"Nice night,"
asked the man. He ducked his head forward a little bit and forced an eerie smile, like a dog wetting his jowls. The feigned smile seemed like a trick at first, but then it persisted.
"Sure is,"
she replied, still frozen. The eerie smile was so forced that it began to look more silly than sinister. Something was wrong.
"Nice weather,"
asked the man, still wearing that stupid smile. She could hear him breathing out of his mouth from across the room when it suddenly occurred to her that this man wasn't a charlatan. He was a simpleton. She grimaced for a moment, almost feeling bad or a hint of shame. She unfroze and began moving toward the counter. As she got closer, she could see that the man was much younger than he appeared from afar. Her age or younger. But there was a disheveled quality to him, which aged him. An unkempt beard of peach fuzz and whiskers adorned his bulbous features and round nose. He was sitting down, but even from where she was standing, she could tell that he was an impressive, hulking man of at least 6'6" and well over 300 pounds. Despite his size, she could tell that he was younger than his initial appearance might suggest. He stared at her as she got closer. His eyes were almost crossed now as she reached the counter. The man's smile almost looked nervous as he peered down at her without shifting his head or face, moving only his eyes like a painting with holes cut out.
"Nice to meet you,"
said the man boy. Gina Marie couldn't help but chuckle at the impertinence of the man. His continuous stream of inquiries and niceties were clearly ingrained in him, something he was taught to do but didn't necessarily feel.
"I didn't introduce myself,"
said Gina with a laugh.
"Oh, I'm sorry,"
said the man. The smile quickly faded before returning again.
"My name is James Archibald Knox, but most folks around here call me Archie."
Archie quickly and proudly gestured toward his name badge. It was the only thing on his person that indicated any employment or relation to this place, but it seemed to tether him, a proud token that he belonged somewhere. She smiled at the cute young man whose naivete seemed to be in complete opposition to her own experience. She had grown up too fast, but this man, he was never going to grow up.
"Hi, Archie. My name is Gina Marie, but most people call me Gina."
Even though he was just on the other side of the counter, he waved vigorously at Gina.
"It's nice to meet you, Gina. Is there anything I can help you with, Gina?"
asked Archie. He leaned in close like he had a secret to tell.
"Can I have a pack of Marlboro Reds?"
asked Gina.
"Oh, you shouldn't smoke,"
said Archie. Gina, once again, couldn't help but laugh at the honesty of Archie.
"I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that,"
replied Archie.
"We sell a lot of cigarettes, and I shouldn't have said that. It's bad for business, and Archie doesn't want to be bad for business."
Archie started to shake his head. Gina, playing along, mimicked him and began shaking her head as well.
"No, we wouldn't want that,"
she said.
"No, we wouldn't, Miss Gina.
said Archie.
No, we wouldn't.
Gina laughed. Archie laughed. He didn't really know what was funny, but he didn't mind sharing in her laughter. He liked making people happy, even if he didn't know why he was able to do it some of the time and not all of the time. Archie reached across the counter and handed Gina her cigarettes.
That'll be $4.50, Miss Gina,
said Archie.
Is there anything else I can help you with?
Gina grabbed the cigarettes.
No, that's...
Gina looked down at her side, remembering her beeper and her worried mother back in Los Angeles.
Do you have a phone?
Asked Gina.
Who you calling?
Inquired Archie with great interest. He leaned in again, like a little boy.
My mom,
said Gina.
Your mommy?
Said Archie with great excitement. Gina laughed at the boyish man.
Yes, my mommy,
she replied.
Where does your mommy live?
Asked Archie.
She lives in the valley,
said Gina. Archie shook his head with wide-eyed amazement, like he just heard the name of some distant place in a far-off land.
Wow,
said Archie.
Where does your mom live?
Asked Gina.
In heaven,
said Archie. The comment caught Gina off guard. Their pleasant, light-hearted conversation just regained some of its initial awkwardness. She didn't know what to say.
I'm sorry,
said Gina Marie Avellino.
It's okay,
replied James Archibald Knox.
She's up in heaven now, and they have Mountain Dew,
continued Archie. Gina laughed at his comment, perplexed until she looked across the store to see the fountain soda machine, riddled with Coca-Cola logos and marketing material.
Coca-Cola, Sprite, and Fanta,
said Archie. Gina made no reply.
Coca-Cola, Sprite, and Fanta,
said Archie again.
We used to have Dr. Pepper, but my mommy said that he flunked out of medical school, but that's okay on account that I didn't finish school neither,
said Archie with a frown.
School's not for everyone,
said Gina.
Yeah?
said Archie. Redeemed?
Sure. Besides, you also have Diet Coke,
said Gina. Archie stuck out his tongue, clenched down his teeth, and shook his head in disgust. Gina laughed, and Archie, taking his cues from her, proceeded to laugh again.
Go call your mommy,
said Archie.
I bet she misses you.
Yeah, well, my mommy needs to mind her business,
said Gina.
My mommy burned to death,
replied Archie. Not proud, but oddly factual, as if he were giving someone directions or talking about a landmark. The dial tone on the payphone had already rang twice. Gina stared out across the store at Archie, who sat behind the counter, staring forward without a care in the world, still wearing that same stupid smile and completely unaware of her gaze. There wasn't a care in his mind. How she envied him.
Hello?
Said Rosemary Avellino.
Hi, Mom,
replied Gina Marie.
Oh my God, Gina. It's so good to hear your voice. How are you? Where are you?
Said Rosemary. How am I? Gina thought about it for a long moment as she peered across the shabby gas station at the poor, unfortunate man. She didn't know why, but her eyes started to well up at the sound of her mother's love, and the relief she heard in her mother's voice, knowing that her only daughter was okay.
What's wrong, baby?
Asked Rosemary.
It's Doug, Mom,
Said Gina.
What did he do?
Said Rosemary.
You know what he did,
Replied Gina.
That son of a bitch. That son of a bitch. I told you to be careful around him.
Said Rosemary.
This is why I didn't want to call,
Said Gina.
I'm sorry, you're right. You're right. You didn't do anything wrong, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. He's a grown man and he ought to know better.
Said Rosemary.
but I'm a grown woman,
Replied Gina.
Of course you are. Of course you are. You're a grown woman. You're a beautiful woman. You're my daughter. But he was your employer, and what he did is unacceptable, and you can't hold yourself to a higher moral standard when he holds himself to no standards at all.
He has standards, Mom. He wanted me, didn't he?
Asked Gina.
Why are you defending him?
Asked Rosemary.
Because you love him?
No, because I love myself too much to take myself out of the equation. What he did is unforgivable, and no matter what I decide to do, I'm never going to speak to him again. But I knew what I was doing when I took this risk. He's not the only person to blame.
There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. We see Rosemary Avellino for the first time. She's sitting in her living room, blocked on either side by white walls and hanging ferns, suspended from ornate webs of macrame. The sparsely decorated living room was stylish and intentionally austere, minus the bohemian accents of macrame and a glass-cubed partition near the vestibule which reminded us that this was unmistakably the 90s. Although Rosemary is well into her 50s, she's a beautiful woman, a carbon copy of her equally beautiful daughter, except she swapped her Demi Moore bangs for a more sensible but equally flattering shoulder-length alternative. Subtle streaks of gray hair and a pair of crow's feet were the only thing separating her from her daughter. That, and about 50 miles of desert and urban jungle.
Gina?
Asked Rosemary.
Yes, Mom?
Replied Gina.
I'm proud of you,
Said Rosemary.
Thanks, Mommy.
Said Gina. The word mommy made her eyes wander back to her new friend behind the counter. He continued to smile and stare off into space. Tears welled in her eyes so fast that she was afraid to blink, afraid to break the seal and release the floodgate of emotions.
And Gina?
Yes, Mother,
Said Gina, fighting back the tears.
I think you're going to be a great mom,
Said Rosemary. Gina couldn't handle it anymore. She hung up the dial and began to weep in the corner by the payphone. On the other side of the store, a mentally handicapped man named Archie kept watch over his domain, completely unaware of the struggles of his new friend, Gina Marie Avellino. The two sat together on opposite sides of the room, on opposite sides of the emotional spectrum, coexisting for a few beautiful moments in perfect juxtaposition. They found themselves situated in an urban landscape fit for a fine artist. It was like Nighthawks, the famous painting by Edward Hopper. On one side, a bucolic man enjoys the fruits of his labor without a care in the world, while on the other side, a working-class woman endures the greatest struggle of her life. Overhead, the buzzing fluorescent bulbs cast shadowless light on the speckled floor below, eager to play a role in this human dichotomy. Gina Marie steeled herself. She straightened up her posture and hid her tears as best she could, then proceeded toward the exit. She was halfway out the door when she heard him call after her.
Goodbye, Gina Marie.
Goodbye, Archie.
She replied. She paused just long enough for Archie to see her face. He hadn't known that she was upset until now, and her grief became his grief. He suddenly looked away shyly, like a boy who saw something he wasn't supposed to see. She forced a smile, then turned and continued out into the night, while her tears recommenced their service. It hurt Gina to know that she had burst his perfect little idyllic bubble. The thought couldn't escape her mind as she climbed back into her Jeep. She was a mess of emotions as she sat down behind the wheel. Less than 2 frantic seconds passed before she reached her new pack of cigarettes, peeling back the cellophane in one fluid motion. The cigarette was on her lips in the blink of an eye. She pressed in the cigarette lighter and began tapping her fingers in anticipation as the concentric black coils slowly came to life. She nervously rocked back and forth, desperate for some nicotine. Her anxiety was through the roof. After a few moments, she was tapping so vigorously that the CDs on the dash began to vibrate along their plastic lids. Whitney Houston and Michael Bolton stared back at her, mockingly, as her fingers persisted, now a separate entity from her own body. She was about to lose it when suddenly, it popped. Gina reached forward to grab the cigarette lighter when a thought entered her mind. Just as she was about to light the cigarette, she leaned back in her seat and removed it from her mouth. With the other hand, she reached down and lightly grazed her stomach. She was petite, without the slightest indication of conception, but she knew that there was life inside of her. She knew. She glared at her other hand, still holding the cigarette, and immediately, but regretfully, crumbled it up.
Shit.
she said as she threw the cigarette out the window. She reached across the seat to grab the rest of the pack and was halfway to throwing it out the window when she stopped herself. She sighed and looked at the pack again, weighing her options. A flash of weakness appeared on her face, as if she wanted to give in. The sign "Cigarettes, Beer, Gas" was still visible in the distance as she came around the first turn. Beside her, the pack of cigarettes had been reinstated to its previous position, comfortably situated in the passenger seat. She glanced over at it, knowing that there was only one missing, but that still meant that there were 19 in attendance. She sighed, but it was hard to tell if it was due to her own inability to rid herself of this nuisance or some deep-seated desire to imbibe. She couldn't have been more than a mile from the convenience store when she came to a stop in the road. A car had broken down and a police cruiser seemed to be just beyond it. She couldn't see the police vehicle, but she knew it was there because its blue and red lights cast ominous hues across the desert night. In front of the vehicle, a single road flare burned at nearly 3,000 degrees, much hotter than a normal flame. The situation was eerily still. The desert knew something that she didn't. Up ahead, the car appeared to be broken down, but there was no driver. The police cruiser had clearly come to their aid, but there was no policeman. The entire scene begged the question, what happened here? She peered around the landscape, looking for any sign of life, but there was nobody. Just a girl and her Jeep, and a baby on the way. She let out a long, exasperated sigh. This could be a while. A burnt-out old home sat off to the side of the lonely crime scene. Its scorched windowsills and southern-style porch gave it a modest quality that you wouldn't expect of a dilapidated old home. Despite its obvious creepiness, it had a sort of charm to it. In the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, someone tried to make a life. And despite the futility of it all, there was something honorable about the whole endeavor. It could have been there for 100 days or 100 years, but she would never know. Gina looked over at the pack of cigarettes, still sitting beside her in the passenger seat. They looked back at her with 19 invertebrate eyes, blind black holes which only got to see the light once before they burned out forever. Suddenly, there was a knock at the window. The noise was so abrupt, Gina Marie screamed as she turned her head to face the driver's side window. Before she could see who it was, a flashlight illuminated her face, blinding her. "Evening, ma'am. Sorry to startle you. Just a little car trouble. We'll have it off the road here in just a bit." The light was shining in her face, obscuring any view of the man who was holding the flashlight. Gina wouldn't even have known that it was a man had it not been for the sound of his voice. She didn't know why, but there was something familiar about it. The soon-to-be mother put her hands up to block herself from the powerful beam, but it was simply impossible to see. A grimace appeared on her face as she shied away from the blinding light. He continued, "This shouldn't take more than a few minutes. You mind putting it into park for me?" said the policeman.
Sure.
Gina replied.
Do you mind lowering that flashlight?
"Sorry about that," he replied. Gina firmly grasped the gear shifter, placing the vehicle into park. As the light turned off, her eyes began to adjust back to the darkness of the desert. She turned to face the man when she realized that she did know him. His face was undeniably familiar, like someone she'd always known or somebody she just met.
Do I know you?
The thought was crossing her mind when it was brought to an utter and complete stop. The fist came into the window so fast that she hadn't even had time to register it. The blow was tremendous, more powerful than anything she had felt in her life. It didn't hurt. It was just hot. The feeling permeated through her whole body, a uniform numbness that seemed to make her ears ring like the heat escaping from a tea kettle. She wasn't unconscious, but she could feel herself dangling like a marionette, held up by the support of the seatbelt. She opened her mouth, moving her jaw to the side. It felt broken. She eased back into her seat, as if she were waking from a dream, drowsy and disoriented. She didn't even move when he reached his arm into the Jeep. She froze like a child hiding under the bed as his long, probing appendage moved silently through the night. He reached across her without uttering a word or making a noise. As he deftly removed the keys from the ignition, the car's engine fell to a hush. Almost immediately, the windy sounds of the desert regained their dominance, no longer competing with the roar of the car's engine. The door was flung open, and Gina was suddenly cognizant enough to be terrified, as if she just discovered what was happening. Her eyes went wide, realizing that this may be her last moment to act. The massive shadow reached across her and unbuckled her seatbelt. She was just about to voice her concerns when the man grabbed her by her literal face. His massive hand covered her eyes and mouth, palming it like a basketball. For a second, she couldn't breathe. Then, in one sudden and unbelievable motion, he ripped her out of her seat and threw her to the ground. She hit the pavement so hard that it knocked all of the wind out of her. She wanted to scream, but all that came out was an exhale and a groan. She lay on the ground for just a moment, still unsure of where she was or who she was. This wasn't her life. The man grabbed her by the length of her short black hair. He yanked it with such force that her entire body began to move. She clutched at his hands in desperation as he started to drag her away from her car by nothing but her hair. She finally let out a well-earned scream. It echoed through a lonely desert, far from listening ears. She persisted, but it was no use. The sand and grit beneath her were like sandpaper as he dragged her across the desert floor, still screaming. The skin along the small of her back began to open as tiny rocks and pebbles etched ancient lines in her porcelain flesh. The pain was excruciating as pus and skin gave way to genuine blood and misery. He casually stepped over a patch of brush, pulling her behind him like a taxidermist pulling a dead animal. The vegetation scraped her in a novel way, uniquely distinguishable from the cold ground below. Her whole body contoured around it as he pushed forward into the night. Gina made note of every bump, bush, and mound as he pulled her farther and farther into the desert. She no longer had the energy to hold onto his hands. She grimaced as she let go and fell the rest of the way to the ground. Tufts of her hair fell away, and some remained in his fingers as they were ripped from her scalp. She was in such pain that she barely winced when her head hit the ground. The man sighed. He walked around her, still clutching the locks of black hair. He reached down to grab her feet and began dragging her again. She looked up at the stars as her body undulated over the ground. 1,000 stars were her only witness, watching the whole scene play out in an incredible cosmic display. She could feel herself slipping away. It was cool out, but it wasn't cold, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. What a beautiful night. Chapter 2. Rosalind Gutierrez. Rosalind Gutierrez was westbound on Pear Blossom Highway. Her '96 Ford Explorer glided through the desert night without making a sound. As a nurse, she was used to coming home late. Driving through the desert to her home in Palmdale was nothing new, but tonight was different. Unlike Gina Marie, who was eastbound and struggling to get away from it all, Rosalind was westbound, headed home, still wearing her OR scrubs and white cross trainers. Her hair was messy and unkempt, but her uniform was suspiciously clean, as if her body and soul had worked 2 different shifts. Her eyes drifted across the dash and settled on an image of herself, a man and a boy in between them. After a moment, she quickly looked away, as if she didn't want the picture to know she had been looking at it. She nervously lit a Camel with the cigarette lighter as she drove. In the background, Torn by Natalie Imbruglia played lightly on the radio. The song was just about to reach its second chorus when Rosalind reached over and shut off her radio.
There's just so many things that I can't touch, I'm torn.
She drove on into the night, led only by the humming motor of her Ford Explorer. The radio was silent for a long moment, before Rosalind really allowed herself to reminisce. She was anxious, and there was an air of guilt about her, but there was something else that was driving her this evening. Rosalind had a secret. A wicked smile crept across her face as she exhaled cigarette smoke. Through the haze, Rosalind's gorgeous face and button nose were flanked on either side by a mess of natural curls. Her olive skin was dotted with perfectly sporadic freckles which seemed to outline her cheeks and nose as if they were painted on. Her hair was pulled back into a bun with small tufts of black curls burst out on either side, bookending her face in a way that couldn't be more flattering if it had been intentional.
You're so gorgeous,
said Sophia, as she playfully yet lovingly ran her hands through Rosalind's hair. Rosalind shook her head, as if she didn't want to give in to the daydream. She tried to focus on the road up ahead, but it was no use. Her mind began to drift back to better times.
You're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. I couldn't believe you said yes when I asked you to get coffee.
I just got done a 12-hour shift. How could I say no to coffee?
Replied Rosalind. The two women were face to face, lying next to each other in a modestly sized bed. Sophia ran her hands through Rosalind's hair another time. Despite her shyness, Sophia could tell how much Rosalind liked it. She grabbed her forcefully by a handful of her curls and pulled Rosie in for a kiss. Their two lips touched in unison, like the optical illusion where you either see two women face to face or a glass of wine. Sophia continued to pull her in, balling her curls between her fingers. Rosalind pulled away.
Ouch, Jesus,
said Rosalind, surprised by the pain.
Sorry,
replied Sophia.
No, you're not,
said Rosalind. She wasn't sorry. The two began to laugh out loud. They carried on for a moment, each laughing in their own way, without breaking eye contact with the other. By the time they caught their breath, they had eased back into each other's arms. Sophia was much more forceful and domineering than Rosalind. She could feel Sophia's tongue enter her mouth. Sophia kissed her in a way that she hadn't been kissed in years, maybe ever. She liked how Sophia made her feel. Rosalind reciprocated, giving Sophia all of herself. Their lips and mouths seemed to accent each other in a perfectly picturesque way, as either person struggled to gain ground over the other. Sophia moved to mount Rosalind, and Rosalind let her win. Sophia pinned her arms to the bed before administering another delicate kiss. They were a lovely couple, even if they couldn't be.
Seriously, I can't believe I'm with you right now,
said Sophia. Rosalind bit her lip.
I can,
she replied. Sophia was a similarly attractive Hispanic woman, but was more stoic in her frame and more understated in the way she presented herself. Rosalind looked like a wife and mother who was trying to keep up a certain facade, whereas Sophia was dressed down in a way that appealed to Rosalind. She aspired to be a more effortlessly beautiful and strong person like Sophia. Unlike Rosalind, Sophia had straight hair which she kept short in a boyish, overgrown pixie, and her lips were thinner than Rosalind's, but somehow sharper and more angular. Rosalind was short and inviting with supple features, while Sophia had an edginess to her. She seldom wore makeup, but when she did, she looked more like a punk rocker than a nurse. Rosalind wished she had a better reason for loving her, but she was just cool. Rosalind actually found it almost embarrassing how attracted she was to her new lover. She had never been with a woman before, and there was something wildly new and exciting about the whole endeavor. And despite being deeply connected with her on both a personal and spiritual level, she also liked how it made her feel a little physically embarrassed. She wasn't ashamed as if she'd done anything wrong or accepted any kind of fault. There was just a juvenile quality to it all. She felt like a little girl who didn't want her parents to know that she had started kissing boys, or, in this case, a girl. There was a time when kissing a boy seemed like the craziest thing in the world, something forbidden and taboo. Then, she reached a certain age and it was no longer a big deal. Acceptance made it lose its luster. Now, she had re-emerged into a world where things felt good because she had been told that they were inherently bad. Boys eventually become fair game, but she was taught to never view a woman in this way. And she thought about how ironically unfortunate it was that we want the things we're told that we can't have. It's like a self-defeating prophecy, or telling someone on a tightrope not to look down. She couldn't deny that the risque nature of their arrangement had been part of the appeal, and she often wondered if her feelings were completely genuine, or if they were simply spurred on by a world that denies self-expression. But she also couldn't deny the fact that Sophia's dimples and jawline made her wet.
You knew I was straight. Why did you even ask me?
Said Rosalind. Sophia laughed as she playfully reached for Rosalind's privates, touching her sensually along the way.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were straight,
said Sophia. Rosalind laughed as she pushed her hands away.
Stop. You know what I mean,
said Rosalind. Sophia thought about what she wanted to say for a long moment. Rosalind studied her closely as the thoughts came together inside of her lover's mind. The moment lasted for so long that Rosalind started to worry and wondered if she was prepared for the answer that Sophia would give.
I think it's because you remind me of my mother. You're beautiful like her, and no matter how good you do your makeup, I could tell the first time that I met you at the hospital on our first shift that he beat you. And despite all that, here you are, raising a son, holding a job, putting on your best face. I loved you right then, just like I loved her,
said Sophia. The comment was heartfelt, bringing Rosalind to the verge of tears, but the feeling was bittersweet, knowing that the tragedy in her life had paved the way for something better.
I wish we met under different circumstances,
replied Rosalind. Sophia reached over and grabbed her face affectionately.
I don't,
said Sophia. The two exchanged a kiss before nestling even deeper into each other's arms, as if that were even possible.
Besides, I think you wanted me more than I wanted you.
The two started laughing before Rosalind climbed on top of Sophia, pinning her to the bed and subverting their typical power dynamic.
How could I want to be with a woman? I've never been with one before,
said Rosalind.
Exactly,
replied Sophia.
You're so stupid,
laughed Rosalind.
Seriously,
exclaimed Sophia.
Shut up,
said Rosalind.
Nah, seriously. You looked like an animal the day I met you,
said Sophia. The comment silenced Rosalind. She didn't know what to say. Sophia seized on the opportunity, using her full force to flip Rosalind over onto her back, mounting her and reasserting her dominance.
You see yourself as this migrant mother, Dorothea Lange type? But you're not. Not, chica. You're better than that. Stronger than that. You're not a victim. You're a lion.
A lion?
Rosalind replied. Sophia smiled.
A lioness. You live in this world where the men eat their young, a world where predators are always trying to take a piece of you, and despite all of that, you go out every day looking for something better, something more. That's why I love you,
said Sophia.
Well, if I'm a lioness, then what does that make you?
Asked Rosalind.
The king of the jungle,
said Sophia with a wicked smile.
Oh my God,
laughed Rosalind. Rosalind rolled her eyes at her playful partner. Sophia began to growl in a low, rumbling tone as she lowered her face closer and closer to Rosalind's privates. Rosalind's laugh was suddenly caught in her throat. She prepared herself for what was about to happen next.
And I'm going to need a machete to hack my way through this bush,
said Sophia.
Bitch,
cried Rosalind. She playfully smacked at Sophia amidst bursts of laughter and a torrent of apologetic kisses.
Bitch, you know I shave,
said Rosalind.
I know, my bad,
laughed Sophia.
You are bad,
said Rosalind.
Seriously though, you know I love you. You're a good mom and a good nurse. Manny is lucky to have you,
proclaimed Sophia. All it took was a single mention of her son, and the conversation suddenly took on a much more serious tone.
Aye, Manuel,
said Rosalind.
Hopefully he grows up to be a better man than his daddy.
I'm going to kill that piece of shit, I swear to God,
said Sophia.
If Hector finds out about us, he'll kill us both. So will my parents,
said Rosalind.
Mine too,
replied Sophia. The two held each other like refugees on teeming shores, tempest-tossed, not knowing if they would ever live in a world that allowed women to be more than just mothers, daughters, and wives. The lamp beside the golden door burned a little more dimly at the prospects of their liberty.
What time is it?
Asked Rosalind. Sophia reached over to the nightstand to grab her wristwatch.
It's 1:30,
Said Sophia.
Fuck. I thought it was still before midnight.
Replied Rosalind. Rosalind immediately shot out of bed, reaching for her scrubs, and grabbed her car keys. She was halfway dressed before Sophia could respond.
I thought you were working a double.
Said Sophia. Rosalind shot her a dirty look.
I'm sorry.
Said Sophia.
He's going to start asking questions if I keep showing up late.
Exclaimed Rosalind.
Well, maybe it's a sign. Maybe it's time for you to finally get away from him.
Said Sophia.
Get away from him? And go where? Here?
Asked Rosalind.
Yeah, sure, why not?
Said Sophia.
You know why. We just outlined the reasons why. My son, my husband, my family, the world. You're already here. This is already your life. It's easy for you to live like this because you're already living it. Nothing would change for you if we were suddenly together. Nothing. Me, on the other hand, my whole life would be ruined.
Said Rosalind.
I don't want to ruin your life, Rosie. I just worry about what he's going to do to you if you stay.
Replied Sophia.
Don't worry about me. I can handle myself.
Said Rosalind. Sophia waited a moment before she responded.
Look, I know this is still new for you, and I knew you were straight when I met you, but don't act like my life is so easy. I'm the openly gay one, remember? I'm not trying to fuck up your life, Rosie. I just want to be a part of it. I just want to be with you, even if you don't know how you feel about me. Even if you realize 6 months from now that it was just a phase. I love you and I'm sorry that you're the only one who has to take risks when you love me back.
Said Sophia.
I said I can handle myself.
Exclaimed Rosalind.
But you shouldn't have to, baby. That's the whole point. If you love someone, then you shouldn't be afraid.
Replied Sophia. The comment hung in the air for a long time, ruminating and transforming into a deafening silence. Rosalind was all dressed now, ready to walk out the door. After a moment, Rosalind bent down, kissed her on the lips, and then once more on the forehead. She turned to walk out of Sophia's apartment when she stopped suddenly in the doorway.
You know, if there were never cloudy days, then we wouldn't appreciate the sunny ones.
Said Rosalind. Her ability to find a silver lining was both a source for inspiration and a cause for sorrow. Life always seems to cast an optimist in the leading role of a tragedy. Rosalind smiled at Sophia, trying her best to put up a strong face. Sophia looked back at her, teary-eyed. Neither one knew where this relationship, or this life, was going. And neither one knew that this was the last time they'd ever see each other. An 18-wheeler went roaring by, calling her attention back to the present. She was back on Pear Blossom Highway, navigating her way through the night. Tears welled in her eyes as she thought about the conversation with Sophia, and she wondered what would become of the rest of her life. These thoughts were all running through her mind when she decided to turn the radio back on. It came to life with a hissing static crackle that made her jump as she turned the dial. Outside, the desert night peered in, trying to have a listen. She turned the dial twice as a mixture of Christian rock, talk radio, and advertisements all collided in one amalgam of jumbled noise. She stopped suddenly when a news bulletin caught her attention.
Alright, that was Torn by Natalie Imbruglia. That one's really tearing up the
the charts right now. And coming up, we've got Hanson Bob. But before that, we've got some breaking news here at the top of the hour. Police in San Bernardino County just discovered another cache of human remains in the desert outside of Phelan. For those of you who don't know, that's about 35 miles east of Palmdale, located right there off of the 15,
said the DJ. Rosalind was suddenly very interested in the bulletin, as if it had some relevance to her life.
Police discovered the remains earlier this week, but say they were waiting on forensic analysis to positively identify the body before releasing any statement to the public. Police are now saying that the cache of human remains containing over 150 bones belong to a missing local woman named Rhonda Myers, a school teacher from Temecula who disappeared 2 years ago at around this same time. Miss Myers was returning home from a hiking trip with friends when she and her car were never seen again. This discovery was the third such discovery in the past 18 months, now prompting the San Bernardino Police Department to put out a statewide advisory in an effort to be more transparent. The first two discoveries weren't made public because police were unable to identify a pattern in the killer's behavior until this third discovery came to light. Police are now saying that while the details are sketchy, it does appear that there's a new serial killer in Southern California,
said the DJ. Rosalind shuddered when she heard the news come across the radio. She shook her head in disgust. Poor girls.
The other two women have now been identified as Helen Prescott of Sylmar and Janice Epps of Fontana. Both of their remains were found in a similar fashion as Miss Myers, leading police to believe that the killer's MO involves some form of abduction and torture, before processing the remains for disposal. Police have also expanded the parameters of their investigation to include all missing persons cases in the area involving women. That includes Gina Marie Avellino, the pregnant woman who disappeared nearly 3 years ago and may be yet another victim in this brutal series of grisly murders. Police are advising all drivers to use caution while traveling in the desert. While details are still sketchy at this time, it does appear that all women were traveling along the 138 Pear Blossom Highway when they were last seen,
said the DJ. Just then, Rosalind couldn't help but notice the sign as she drove by. Pear Blossom Highway, 138. She turned her head to watch as it passed by, almost in disbelief.
Law enforcement officials say that anyone driving through this area at night should use precaution and avoid approaching abandoned vehicles or stopping. Alright, it's 2 minutes to 2, 52 degrees in the desert and 56 in the valley. Coming up next, we have Hanson Mbop.
Mbop began to play while Rosalind continued to look out of her back window, still trying to get another glance at the ominous road sign. When she turned her head to face forward, she saw a car up ahead, directly in the middle of the road with its hazards on. Just beyond it, the lights of a police cruiser began to flash as her car eased to a stop. Right away, she was apprehensive, but she didn't have much choice except to abide. She coasted to a stop before placing the vehicle in park. Something was wrong. She was nervous, and her nerves seldom got the best of her. She peered out in every direction, but it was so dark, she couldn't see anything. Her hand rested on the gear shifter, ready to take off at a moment's notice. After nearly 10 seconds of idleness, Rosalind was about to put the car back in drive and go around when the flashlight turned on. Suddenly, he was standing right next to her vehicle. She didn't see him coming at all, and the flashlight nearly made her scream, but she kept it in, not willing to give him the satisfaction. But, even more than that, she didn't want to appear afraid. The last thing you want to do when you're confronted by a predator is to show fear, so she watched him nervously as he began to sheepishly tap on the glass, obscured by the brightness of his flashlight. Still unaware of the man's intentions, she kept quiet, allowing him to make the first move. Her hand remained fixed on the gear shifter. "Evening, ma'am. San Bernardino Police Department. Can I ask you to turn off the vehicle?" said the policeman. Rosalind put down her window a few inches, just enough to hear the officer. The engine continued its monotonous hum like a faithful horse, undaunted by the stranger.
That's okay. I can hear you just fine,
replied Rosalind as she rolled the window back up. She couldn't see his face, but she could tell by his body language that he was displeased. "Ma'am, turn off your vehicle and roll your window down. Now," said the officer. There was no question mark this time. He wasn't asking. He was telling. Rosalind thought about placing the car into drive, veering around the stopped vehicles and driving off into the night. But she also didn't want to commit multiple felonies and spend the next 3 to 5 years behind bars, so she relented. "He's just a cop," she reassured herself as she turned off the engine and rolled down the window, one crank at a time.
I'm sorry about that. It's been a long night. What seems to be the problem?
Said Rosalind, feigning ignorance. 11:24, said the policeman. Rosalind didn't know what to say. The comment confused her. It was like she was talking to a robot. She looked at the clock on her dashboard, which read 2:04, offering little comfort or clarity. "Abandoned vehicle," said the policeman. Rosalind didn't respond. A long, awkward moment passed before he broke the silence. "You're a nurse, huh?" asked the policeman. Rosalind touched her uniform, acknowledging his comment before responding.
Oh, yeah. Just worked a double,
replied Rosalind. "A double, huh?" replied the officer. "You been drinking tonight?" Rosalind couldn't believe her bad luck.
No, officer, I haven't,
she replied. The officer shifted his weight from one side to the other, giving no clear indication of what he was thinking. A long moment passed where neither said anything. Rosalind was suddenly very nervous once again. "I'm going to need you to step outside of the vehicle, ma'am," said the officer.
But I said I haven't had anything to drink,
replied Rosalind. "DUI checkpoint, ma'am," said the officer.
I thought you said it was an abandoned vehicle,
questioned Rosalind. The officer didn't know what to say. He was caught in a lie, and there was no point maintaining the deception any longer. "You sure are pretty," said the officer.
Excuse me?
replied Rosalind. The comment was completely inappropriate. The fist that followed was an even greater impropriety. Just like Gina Marie and the others, the punch came so suddenly that she didn't feel it until moments after. Her body fell back into the seat, dazed from the blow, and still in disbelief as she tried to register the devastating punch. Her beautiful face was immediately swollen, as a single trail of blood began listing from her right nostril. She could feel her consciousness begin to slip away as the night closed in all around her. Just as she was on the cusp of an eternal dream, she steeled herself, not ready to die, not ready to concede to this piece of shit. As he reached his arm into the car to remove the keys, something happened that had yet to occur in the sporadic but brutal history of these slayings. She fought back. Rosalind had been beaten before, although she wasn't sure if Hector, her husband, had ever hit her this hard. She couldn't remember ever being hit quite so hard. As the single trail of blood trickled out of her nose, it flowed over her lip and into her mouth. She could taste the salt and iron. The punch made her feel like she wanted to shut her eyes and go to sleep forever, but she couldn't give up. She thought of Manny and Sophia and everything else that was good in life. Suddenly, she clutched onto his arm, grabbing him just as his hands reached the keys. He was startled by her resilience. Nobody had ever remained cognizant after such a hit. She was different. The man reached for the keys with all of his might, but his outstretched arm wasn't strong enough to overpower the full force of her entire coiled-up body. His fingers fumbled with the ends of her keys as she clawed at his open hands. He changed tactics and tried to retract his arm, but it was also no use. She clung to his arm with her whole body, hanging on for dear life. He was a large, powerful man, and it took all of her strength to hold his arm as he tried desperately to shake her off. Rosalind felt like a small rodent as she clung to his massive arm. He shook her from side to side between the seat and the dash, slamming her whole body in every direction like a pinball caught between two bumpers. Her head was reeling, and her body was failing, but she persisted. The man tried with all of the force he could muster, but he couldn't shake her loose, so he went for a different approach. Instead of pulling away, he pushed forward. He leaned in with such power that it shook the whole frame of the car, shifting it onto two wheels for the briefest of moments. Rosalind felt herself become weightless as she was rammed into her center console, knocking the wind out of her. He bent his arm as he pressed in, delivering a devastating blow with the side of his forearm. The hit was so sudden that she let go of his arm, and the shadowy appendage fell away, like ink falling off the page. She was reeling again. She knew that she didn't have much left. This is it. She sat for what seemed to be a long time, contemplating everything that had just happened, but it was only a second, and the second was over. After a moment, his hand began to reach back into the car, probing through the night once again. This time, however, it moved with deftness and clarity. There was no fumbling or fighting, just a single succinct movement. Rosalind sat motionless, staring at his fingers as they clutched around the keys for the second time. His hands looked giant to her, massive, cumbersome, and human, when it suddenly occurred to her that he had 6 fully functional fingers. Polydactyl. Functional polydactyl. In her time working in the obstetrics unit at the hospital, she had seen plenty of newborns. And in that same period, she had come across more than one child who was born with an additional finger or toe, but she'd never seen one that was fully functional. And she'd certainly never seen one that looked so symmetric and effective. Almost like he was a different species, or the next step in the evolutionary chain. It was so painfully uniform and seemingly normal that you almost wouldn't notice it. Most of the time, when someone is born with an additional appendage, it looks like an afterthought or a mistake. But this almost seemed purposeful. This wasn't a mole or a tumor or some half-shrunken finger, but it was something mechanical with moving parts, created for some unknown necessity by an engineer we'll never see, in a factory we can never go. It would be naive to call him a monster or an abomination, some anomalous mistake, because there was something divine in his creation, the kind of thing that makes you think God and the devil are the same person. She didn't have any fight left in her as his strange hands clutched the keys. She turned away, as if in shame or fear, when her eye caught a glimpse of her son in the picture on the dashboard. She's not sure what, but something happened to her when she saw her son's eyes. Just as she was ready to concede and walk willingly into the arms of death, the love she held for him gave her just enough strength to defend herself one last time. Suddenly, the diminutive woman lunged forward and grabbed the man by his forearm. Before the massive attacker could react, she bit down with all of her force. The man, who had been relatively emotionless up to this point, let out a horrific howl as his blood ran through the cracks of her teeth. Like an animal with a wounded paw, the strange creature retracted his hand the second she let go of it and immediately began cradling his delicate appendage. The man pulled back his arm so suddenly and so completely that he gave her an opportunity, and she seized it. Rosalind quickly sat up, pressed down the brake, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The man, realizing his error, quickly reached into the window, but it was too late. She shifted the car into gear, and her Explorer began to pull away. He clawed at her face, ripping out a handful of curly hair as the vehicle accelerated into the night. He lost his balance and fell as the car narrowly veered past him, pulling him to the ground. Rosalind could see him tumble across the road in her rearview mirror as she sped away. She wanted to look ahead, but she couldn't take her eyes off of his motionless body when, suddenly, he sat up. The engine roared while she pressed the accelerator into the floor as hard as she could. All around her, the desert landscape flew past her in a blur of cacti, sagebrush, and nothingness. She looked ahead for just a split second before her eyes turned back to the rearview mirror. To her astonishment, the man was gone. The road was empty. Where did he go? Without thinking, she turned her head, craning her neck to get a better view of the road behind her. She turned as far as she could while still maintaining the constant and unceasing pressure on the gas pedal. Her nerves were through the roof, and her adrenaline was pumping. The feeling was so intense that she was almost excited when she turned back around to face the road. Up ahead, there was a curve in the street. She cut the wheel and slammed on the brakes, but it was no use. It was only a small dip and shoulder, but it was enough. Her vehicle slammed headfirst into the small embankment, sending a cloud of dust into the night as the front end crumbled and the engine cycled its final revolution. There was a strange humming noise that seemed to echo through her. The car was destroyed, but it continued to vibrate, some sort of twitch or death rattle, moaning for someone to put it out of its misery while its internal components realized the inevitable. The front end of the car had been compressed in such a way that the entire interior had been compacted and drastically reduced in size. Rosalind could feel the mechanical buzz as the walls closed in around her, pressing in from every angle. She wasn't pinned in place, but she wasn't far off, and as the buzzing persisted, she could feel a throbbing pain begin to emanate from her leg.
I wanna stand with you on the mountain. I wanna lay with you in the sea.
Truly, Madly, Deeply by Savage Garden greeted her on the radio. All at once, her hearing returned to her, and many things were suddenly very apparent. The engine was humming, the radio was playing, the automated door ajar sensor was dinging, and her leg was broken. She was so jammed into place that she had to lean into herself, pressing into the window just to get a view of her own thigh. She was so astonished to see her own femur that she leaned in closer just to verify what she was actually seeing. As she bent closer toward it, the pain was suddenly excruciating, and the injury was confirmed. Yep, it's broken. She hadn't even caught her breath when the door was suddenly and forcibly ripped open. The hinge itself had been so crushed that the whole door was nearly ripped off when he pulled it back. Rosalind felt like a dollar bill being pulled out of a folded wallet as her body was removed from the crushed vehicle and tossed to the ground with utter disregard. The man was breathing heavily and clearly exasperated as he dragged her body to the ground with a complete lack of remorse, like a hunter carrying a beautiful prize. The pain was so tremendous that she couldn't make a sound. Her body was compensating so much for her hip that her spine took most of the fall. The way she hit the ground was so off balance and compensatory that it felt like she broke her back when she made impact. But in some strange, spasmodic response, she sat up immediately, in a single reflexive movement, to take pressure off of the shattered leg. She clutched at her wound, as he had moments before. The pain was so unbearable that she didn't even notice when he bent down to see what all the fuss was about. All she could do was hold her leg and stare at the jagged bone as it pressed through the side of her thigh and out. The bone broke about 3/4 of the way up her thigh, beneath where the ball of the femur inserts to the pelvis, just below the top extension of the femur, known respectively as the acetabulum and the greater trochanter. As the pain intensified, Rosalind shifted her gaze onto the man. He was now kneeling beside her, reaching out with trembling hands, as if to receive her severed bone like a newborn child. His open palms faced upwards, showing a tenderness and regard that shocked her into a state of instant catatonia. These hands that only moments ago were trying to end her life now seemed eager to foster it, to shelter it, to care for it. She looked on in complete silence and wide-eyed amazement as the man began to softly and delicately touch the area around her wound. It hurt a little bit more every time that he touched it, but she didn't dare wince. She just watched as the man began to unravel. "Oh no," he said. "Oh no, 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 no," he continued. The man began to weep, short bursts of meaningful tears through his soft-spoken apologies. He seemed to be devastated at the sight of her leg, as if he had big plans for it. as if something he'd been planning his whole life had just gone to waste. He wept for her leg, as if it meant more to him than it did to herself. He didn't take his eye off her leg, and she didn't take her eyes off of him. "I'm sorry," said the man to the leg. Rosalind was bewildered. She could tell that something was deeply wrong with this person, and despite his transgressions, she almost began to feel sorry for him. Something in his mind was more broken than her leg could ever be. She didn't know why, but she felt obligated to say something.
It's okay,
said Rosalind. The man's entire disposition suddenly and violently changed. His head snapped up to face her, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. "I wasn't talking to you," said the man. If Rosalind had time to react, she would have been rightfully horrified. But before she could say or do anything else, he stood up, turned about face, and began dragging her by the ankle into the desert. He dragged her by the broken leg, ignorant to her cries of anguish. With every step, she could feel her entire body weight pull from one side to another, like a giant hinge around the broken bone. There was nothing connecting her pelvis to her lower leg, so the skin did the work while the bone beneath shuffled from side to side, showing little remorse for its own flesh. She cried again and again, but it was no use. She could feel her leg extend an extra inch or so with every stride as the bones pulled apart, then came back together, then apart, then back together, over and over again. She tried to think of her son Manuel, one last time, but the pain was too great. She let out one final cry as her eyes rolled into the back of her head, exhausted. And then, she was gone. Chapter 3. Madeline Crow. Madeline Crow was moving with great pace down Pear Blossom Highway when she saw something that made her pull over her vehicle. Her rental car passed over the shoulder and onto the gravel before coming to a stop. She eased the car into park while Drive by Incubus played on the radio in the background. We didn't know her yet, so we don't know why she stopped. But something very particular about this spot caused her to pull over in this exact location at that exact moment. She sat for a while listening to the radio, peering out at the desert around her. Unlike the other women, it was daytime. As the song came to an end, the DJ began to speak.
Alright, that was Drive by Incubus coming in here at the top of the hour, winding down the end of our 4-song all-day-long lineup. Before that we had Lifehouse with Hanging by a Moment, followed by Matchbox 20, If You're Gone, and that new one that you guys can't get enough of, Fallen by Alicia Keys. Whew, she's hot, man. I'd sure like to... Well, geez, alright. Coming up, we got a few messages from our sponsors, but I've got one more for you, loaded up in the chamber. Right now it's 2 minutes past noon and you're listening to The Goon, here on KKLA. It's 78 in the valley, 85 in the desert, and a breezy 72 if you're on the coast. Up next, get ready for Leanne Womack with I Hope You Dance.
Madeline listened for another moment before abruptly turning off the radio.
I hope you never lose your sense of wonder.
Madeline sat in silence as the barren highway extended behind her into the distance. Even in the middle of the day, there was hardly any traffic. After another moment, a single flatbed truck drove by, shaking her car as it passed. Then, it was silent again. Madeline exited the vehicle. She wore a pantsuit that was pressed to perfection. Every pinstripe stood in a flawless sequence, paralleling each other at every turn and bend before coalescing at the seam. Every thread was counted, every fold was calculated, and every contour was thoroughly vetted and approved by upper management. Her hair was pulled back in a modest ponytail. Although it was flattering and intentional, there was a certain curtness to it, something improvised, like a rolled-up sleeve or a cracked knuckle, ready to get to work. She was about 5'9" and 145 pounds with shoulder-length hair and a heart-shaped face flanked on either side by strands of dirty blonde hair, which somehow managed to escape the grasp of her near-perfect pony. She had a small, angular nose with an equally complimentary chin to match it. Over the past few years, her baby face had receded to reveal the subtle curves of her cheekbones and the delicate shape of her jawline. You might call her cute if she wasn't such a woman, and you might call her beautiful if she wasn't so stoic. The truth is, you can list as many tropes, cliches, or characteristics as you want, but at the end of the day, she simply looked like a woman who was slowly coming into her own, one day at a time. Madeline peered out at the desert before her, as if she was looking for something. Her hot gaze was so powerful that it seemed to scorch the earth as it passed from one stone to the next, leaving none unturned. She kneeled down to get a better look at the landscape as she picked up a handful of dirt, paying it little mind as it sifted through her fingers and back to the ground. What was she looking for? Despite being a mere 26 years of age, her face told stories through subtle lines and tiny wrinkles around her almond eyes. Her face was undeniably youthful, but she possessed a sort of tired quality, like she'd been up all night studying, or perhaps she'd seen too much in her short time here on Earth. However, regardless of how prepared she was or wasn't, she hadn't seen him when he walked up behind her. "Afternoon, ma'am," said a friendly, familiar voice. The greeting startled her. Madeline turned around quickly to see William Marsh. The man stood well over 6 feet tall, with a placid look on his face and a revolver prominently displayed on his hip, ready to defuse the situation or escalate it. Next to his gun was an equally garish badge bearing the emblem of the Los Angeles Police Department. It gleamed in the sun as he shifted his weight from side to side.
"Afternoon,"
replied Madeline without another word. The succinctness of her response didn't satisfy him. The hoods of his eyes dipped below their lids as he squinted for a better look. "Can I help you, ma'am?"
"No, thank you. I'm fine."
Madeline was curt to the point of being rude, but she didn't really care. She had more pressing things on her mind. She continued to peer out at the blank patch of desert, ignoring the questions of the police officer. He wasn't wearing a uniform, opting instead for a black suit and jacket. But she could tell he was a cop based on nothing else but his rigid posture and the way his hand seemed to float perpetually over the handle of his sidearm, even though he never removed his hands from his pockets. His overly cautious nature spoke volumes about his amateur approach, and Madeline couldn't help but take note of his shoes. They were black like dress shoes, but upon further inspection, it was obvious that they were Nikes, black cross trainers. He clearly chased people, but she had her doubts about whether he actually ever caught anyone. "Ma'am, this is an active crime scene," said the policeman.
"I know,"
replied Madeline. The policeman was perplexed by her answer. Aside from a few scuffs in the sand and assorted tire marks, there was nothing to indicate anything significant about the area. No caution tape, no chalk lines, no evidence, just a few cacti and maybe a prickly pear if you're lucky. Two strangers stood across from each other on the shoulder of Pear Blossom Highway as another 18-wheeler bounded past in a single continuous blur. "Can I see your identification, ma'am?" asked the officer.
"Can I see yours?"
said Madeline. She was standoffish, agitated. So was he. After a brief moment, Madeline coolly reached into her back pocket. The policeman held his breath, tensing up as her arm reached behind her back and out of sight, but his hands never left their pockets. The man's hair was a light blonde, almost gray color, but he was young, no more than 5 years older than Madeline. He had full lips, with a square chin and dimples, along with a 5 o'clock shadow that seemed to be a permanent fixture on his rugged but comely face. He was small-town handsome, nothing special compared to some of the men you see walking around Hollywood, but there was a charm to him like a cowboy or a country singer. Besides, she wasn't from around here, and she had never been to Hollywood. She was from Virginia, Quantico, to be exact.
"Special Agent Crow, FBI,"
said Madeline. The man's posture relaxed and his brow unfurled, but he was still confused. He held her gaze without responding. As a car droned off into the distance, the silence of the desert seemed to return as the low hum of crickets competed with the overpowering and relentless stirring of the wind. "Madeline Crow?" said the policeman. The first name caught her off guard. Now it was Madeline who was bewildered. "Do I know you?" "We've been looking forward to your arrival," continued the policeman. Madeline didn't know what to say. The not-so-aloof officer could sense her confusion and did his best to elucidate. "Marsh. Detective William Marsh," said the policeman. Before she could say a word, the man quickly removed his hands from his pockets and vigorously shook her hand before promptly placing them back in the pockets of his department store suit. His hands felt massive as they wrapped around hers, and powerful. She made note of what seemed to be a strange callus around his knuckle, but the hand was already back in his pocket before she could get a closer look. "Funny running into each other out here," said Detective Marsh.
Yeah, funny.
Said Madeline. Madeline shook her head at the sheer coincidence, genuinely surprised. "You just got in last night, right?" said the officer. "I'm surprised you beat me up here,"
Just by a minute.
said Madeline, curtly. Madeline was being short with him again. She wasn't sure why she was so prone to do that. It was much more in her nature to be polite, but there was something peculiar about this man. She couldn't tell if she trusted him or not. She stared at him for a long moment. 10 feet away, a small lizard emerged from beneath a crack between the sagebrush. In its eye, the two figures' reflections were cast about on either side of an emotionless black globe, one blink away from oblivion. After a few seconds, the lizard lost interest and scurried away, wondering all along if one day he would ever get the chance to be the protagonist or the villain.
I wanted to get a look before we met at the precinct.
Said Madeline. Sure, said Detective Marsh. See anything? The vagueness of the question would have felt almost patronizing had it not been for his charm. The impartiality of the desert offered little in the way of perspective. Any evidence that may have once existed was long gone. All that remained were a few distant memories, and little reptiles with big dreams.
It's hard to believe that this is all that's left of it,
said Madeline. Yeah, well, after the road crews got done cleaning up the debris, there wasn't much left.
Anything significant?
Inquired Madeline. Well, what little we did manage to collect is over with Dusty Brooks down at the county coroner's office, said the officer. Madeline studied his response. She could tell by his expression that the details were grim.
You found an arm, right?
Asked Madeline. Left, replied Detective Marsh.
Excuse me?
It was her left arm, said Marsh.
Okay,
said Madeline, unamused.
You found an arm then, correct?
Sure did, said Detective Marsh.
Anything significant?
Asked Madeline. Yeah, it's not attached to the rest of her body, said Detective Marsh. The comment hung in the air for a moment before she said anything.
I'd call that significant,
responded Madeline, deadpan. Both of them were somewhat amused by the other, but you couldn't tell if they were laughing at each other or with each other. Sometimes there's a fine line between mutual respect and mutual disdain. There was one thing that might not have come across in your report, or however it is they brief you at the FBI. The initial on-site forensics overlooked it, but they caught it down at the coroner's office.
What's that?
Asked Madeline. Scratches. Scratches down her arm. It seems that when she was making her escape, the killer grabbed a hold of her and left a little bit of himself behind in the process. Our lab hasn't turned up anything yet. There's a good chance the killer isn't in our database, but it's the first thing we've gotten that resembles legitimate evidence in, well, a long time, said Marsh.
Yeah, this one has a lot of firsts,
said Madeline.
First one to get away, first one to call 911, first one to leave a piece of herself behind.
That's why you're here, said Marsh.
Yeah,
said Madeline.
If it's any consolation, we were coming anyway. Charlie Wynn just expedited things.
Well, with all this evidence, I can't say I blame you, said Marsh, gesturing to the open expanse of desert, which offered nothing but murmurs and the whispers of the wind.
Did you get anything off the vehicle?
Asked Madeline. Afraid not, said Marsh. She was driving a Civic with 14-inch tires. The tires are too common to get anything meaningful from the treads or the composition, and the body of the vehicle got so destroyed in the wreck, there wasn't anything left. Certainly not on the driver's side. We have an idea of where she took off, but that's based more on estimates of her speed and the distance traveled before she made impact with the second vehicle. Madeline bent down again to get a better look at the ground. She leaned her head to the side, trying to peer over the surface from a level perspective.
Second vehicle was unharmed, yeah?
Said Madeline. Yeah, that's part of the problem, replied Marsh. Madeline gave him a curious, questioning look. Detective William Marsh noted her concern and continued. The other driver said he was half asleep and didn't even see her car until it made impact. He didn't even slow down. Bastard drove for another 100 feet before he even realized what happened. We would have brought him up on charges if she hadn't crossed into his lane and ran into him. Madeline took a moment to process what he said before responding.
The one that got away,
she said. Almost got away. Just think what we could have gotten out of her if only she was still alive, said Marsh. The way Detective Marsh phrased his response didn't sit well with Madeline. There was something oddly exploitative about the idea that bodies had any responsibility or duty to provide evidence. There was no obligation or burden of proof in her mind. People could expound, embellish, lie, but no cadaver ever told a false truth. Nor could you accuse it of providing false testimony. You can't question a dead body. All you can do is listen. If there was any fault, then the fault lies with the living.
That's not true,
replied Madeline.
Even in death, she's already given us so much. We have no right to ask for any more.
I just meant that.
It's the first real piece of evidence this case has seen in almost 7 years. I wish we had more than a dismembered arm, but we're lucky to have anything after this long.
Sure, said the detective.
And one day when we get this guy, we'll have her to thank,
said Madeline. We have so little to work with. How can you be certain that it's a man? Asked Marsh. Madeline moved past him, stoically ignoring his last comment. She took a few more steps before she was back at her rental car. She opened the driver's side door and started to sit down when she stopped.
Because there's no such thing as monsters, said
Madeline. Detective William Marsh remained in place as she started her engine and drove away in the same direction, picking up where she left off. A small cloud of dust kicked up around him as she drove away, but he paid it no mind, staring off into the desert as her car zoomed toward the horizon. A quiet hush fell around him, and, once again, there was nothing but the serenity of sand and the cool glances of faded cacti. His hands never left his pockets. As she drove down the highway, she familiarized herself with her surroundings, taking in what little she could ascertain from the barren, bleak desert. There were very few trees, sporadic croppings of unmemorable cacti, and almost no real landmarks or noteworthy points of interest. To keep track of things, the locals had adopted a sequential numbering system for the obscure side streets that happened to fall between the more traveled roads which were dignified enough to garner a legitimate name. As a result, she moved with such speed that 126th Street was quickly replaced by 91st, then 53rd, and so on, all the way to Palmdale. Earlier, she passed the first pine tree that she'd seen since she left LA, and almost immediately was greeted by a quaint sign that read, Evergreen Road. Tiny streets with descriptive names like Fort Tejon, Sheep Creek, and Bob's Gap let you know that these were small towns that had no intention of getting any bigger. Pear Blossom possessed a serene but somewhat surreal quality. To her south, the San Gabriels stood between her and greater Los Angeles, poised to blot out the sun come late afternoon. While to her north, along the right side of her car, the world seemed to fall off in the other direction. In the same way that the foothills rose to her left, the valley continued to recede to her right. The effect was such that, whenever you turned north in this part of Pear Blossom, the road seemed to fisheye and extend forever like the horizon line in a Dr. Seuss book, twisting and concaving to fill the frame, ignorant of their impossible proportions. The foreground, background, and middle ground all seemed to blend together as a mixture of sand and faceless, nameless vegetation reached out in every direction, trying desperately to keep up with the wind. When Madeline arrived at the Palmdale Police Department, she was surprised to see that Detective Marsh's vehicle was already in the lot. The precinct was a single-story tan building with a dark brown accent that wrapped around the perimeter of the structure along the bottom. In the front, a 2-story belfry acted as the facade of the building and entrance to the lobby. All along the roof, a corrugated series of Spanish tiles peered down at her in sequence. She thought that the building was the strangest police precinct she'd ever seen, but, in all honesty, she hadn't seen that many, and she was a long way from Virginia. She was greeted at the door by Maureen Klaus, the sheriff's secretary. She was a rotund woman with a round face and a matching head of curly red hair. She wasn't a natural redhead, Madeline could tell. It didn't take an FBI agent to figure that out, but she was a warm, inviting woman. Maureen wore little makeup aside from some mascara. Her natural coloring provided the rest. Rosy cheeks and thin lips flanked on either side by American flag earrings and a brooch with a single gold star.
You sure are a pretty one.
Madeline didn't know what to say. Before she could get a word out, Maureen continued.
How can I help you, sweetheart?
I'm here to see the sheriff,
replied Madeline. Maureen, who was all smiles up to this point, shook and wiggled in place, as if dusting herself off or stiffening up her posture. She was suddenly very serious and professional, taking command of her post.
The sheriff doesn't normally see folks off the street. Do you have any appointment, ma'am?
Asked Maureen.
Yes, I'm his 10 o'clock,
said Madeline. Maureen immediately looked perturbed. She checked her watch to see that it was only 9:48, and then began scouring over the list on her clipboard. She flipped her fingers across the clipboard, leafing through a series of pages in rapid succession, before looking up at Madeline, then back down, then back up again. Outwardly, she may have appeared to be frantic or out of sorts, but Madeline could tell that she was typically a highly organized woman. However, something had her terribly perplexed at this particular moment.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but his 10 o'clock is a meeting with the FBI.
Yes, that's me, Special Agent Madeline Crow,
replied Madeline. She flashed her badge at Maureen, whose eyes went wide with amazement. Almost immediately, she opened her mouth and cocked her head to the side, like someone had just whispered her a secret. She began to laugh at her own mistake, as did Madeline, but not at the situation as much as the woman. Madeline couldn't help but smirk at the lovable woman who just insulted her. When she opened up her mouth again, the words came at a mile a minute.
Oh, I'm so sorry, darling. You look so young. I thought you were one of those damn Mormon girls who wants to know if I had a minute to talk about Jesus Christ.
That's okay,
replied Madeline.
I'm glad because I don't have a minute to talk about Jesus Christ. I have 1 hour a week on Sundays, and that's it, honey. I can't be talking to you all day about Jesus Christ. Now, if you want to talk about Survivor, then I'm all ears.
Really, that's fine,
said Madeline.
I really do apologize, ma'am. Someone wrote down Agent Crow here on my clipboard, and I don't know what I expected. A big bird or something, I suppose.
Maureen laughed again at herself. Madeline was less amused. She wasn't the loquacious type, and she thought people like Maureen were fun from a distance, but this was one arena where she was vastly outmatched. She tensed up and made a pact with herself not to say another word, lest she run the risk of prolonging this already untenable situation. Maureen continued to laugh at herself until the moment subsided. She looked at Madeline, hoping to play off of her reaction, but the FBI agent didn't reciprocate, instead looking down at her feet. The secretary's laughter got caught in her throat as she realized her own impertinence, and once again shook herself and wiggled until she was back on duty. The ends of her curly hair bounced as she stiffened up and addressed the special agent with the utmost professionalism. She leaned in and spoke softly.
I've never met a female FBI agent before.
Madeline didn't say anything, staying true to her pact. Some things were better left unsaid.
Well, if you want to come around the side here, the sheriff is right in the back, Agent Crow.
Thanks.
As she walked away, Madeline couldn't decide if the interaction had been flattering or insulting. But she decided right then and there that she liked Maureen. despite any qualms she may have with busybodies and people who talk too much. The inside of the police station was lined with a series of small glass offices for detectives and lieutenants, with a few larger offices off to the side for group meetings. In the center of the precinct, a small series of cubicles partitioned no more than a dozen desks and small tables. The size of the unit paled in comparison to anything she was familiar with at the bureau, but it was about what she had expected when she was assigned the case. In all honesty, the building and interior were actually much newer and more modern than she had anticipated, just smaller. She knew that the precincts in LA were significantly larger and had 10 times the manpower, but all of the crimes occurred in Palmdale's jurisdiction. As she meandered her way through the mostly empty precinct, Agent Crow couldn't help but think that it was all by design. In the back corner, in the largest office in the precinct, sat a mid-sized man with a gray comb-over, thin mustache, and a smile that seemed to be in direct opposition to his eyes. His mouth was wide with teeth as he tilted his head back to laugh, but his eyes were as cold as polished slate. Tiny black coals peered out behind wrinkled lines and well-earned crow's feet. His long-in-the-tooth smile and genuine laugh couldn't hide the fact that he'd seen things most men had never seen. Across from him sat Detective William Marsh. Despite leaving after her, he had somehow arrived before her. He and the sheriff were already chatting like old friends by the time she had arrived. They were still laughing and carrying on when Madeline reached the doorway. The two men quickly caught their breath and stiffened up when they saw Madeline standing in the threshold. She was an attractive woman, but her posture was incredibly rigid. Leaning against the doorway or knocking would have been a much more normal, approachable way to handle the situation. Instead, Madeline stood as straight as an arrow, awkwardly waiting for the men to address her. After a moment, the young detective spoke up. "Sheriff, this is..." Before he could finish getting a word out, Madeline extended her hand toward the sheriff.
Hey, Sheriff. My name is Madeline.
Before either of them could finish, the sheriff called out,
Now, Maureen, I thought I told you to let me know when our company had arrived,
said the sheriff. From the corner of the office, on the other side of the wall, Maureen responded.
Sorry, Sheriff. She came in so quick. I didn't get a chance.
The three individuals stared at each other inside of the cramped office. For a second, Madeline almost felt like she'd done something wrong. The sheriff studied her up and down, deconstructing the 20-something special agent with his weathered old eyes.
That's all right,
without taking his eye off Madeline.
She sure is pretty, huh, Sheriff?
Called out Maureen from the other room.
Sure is,
said the sheriff without an ounce of love or sarcasm. Madeline stepped inside the office and closed the door. She sat down in the seat next to Detective Marsh. Behind the sheriff's desk, on a small shelf, an LA Dodgers bobblehead stared at her with equally inquisitive eyes. Off to its side, a portrait of George W. Bush hung prominently on the wall next to a handheld American flag and a police mug.
Sorry about Maureen. She's a real open book, that one,
said the sheriff. I like Maureen, said Marsh.
Oh, I love Maureen,
said the sheriff.
She just doesn't know when to shut the hell up.
That's okay,
replied Madeline.
I found her to be very flattering.
Madeline was very succinct with her answer. She never said more than what was needed to be said. The boys were trying to rope her into their little banter, but she had no interest in such things. Her mind had room for one thing and one thing only: finding the killer. When she had nothing else to say, the rest of the laughter died down. They were officially back to business.
Well, you'll have to excuse Willie and I. We go way back.
Willie?
Asked Madeline. As Detective Marsh shifted in his seat, she was suddenly aware of the reference. Yeah, I actually used to play ball up here when I was a kid, said Detective Marsh. I've known Greg for, 20 years?
Has it been that long?
Replied the sheriff.
Greg?
Asked Madeline.
Yeah, sorry. Sheriff Gregory Nils,
said the sheriff, who now rose to his feet and extended his hand. Before Madeline could stand, he had already shook her hand and sat back down. He was one of those people that didn't stand up all the way when he rose from his seat. His back was permanently lurched forward, as if he were about to tell you a secret.
Yeah, Detective Marsh here was the real deal. Almost made it all the way,
said the sheriff. I don't know about that, replied Marsh. 1 month in AAA.
Well, you took it a lot farther than Daniel, that's for damn sure.
Nah, Danny was pretty good, said Marsh. Once again, they could tell that Madeline was lost. The sheriff did his best to clue her in.
Danny's my son. Will and him used to play ball together here in Palmdale back when they was teenagers,
said the sheriff.
Whew, I can't believe it's been that long.
I thought you were from LA,
said Madeline. Yeah, well, my folks lived here in San Bernardino till they split up. Then, Dad moved to Palmdale and Mom stayed there. Our travel team played at a park down the street, so I used to spend a lot of time up here. That was a long time ago, said the young detective.
Long time,
echoed the old sheriff. Madeline felt like the odd one out again, but she had no interest in their nostalgia. She had more pressing matters to attend to. She waited a moment for the reminiscing to subside before she began her line of inquiry.
So, who came up with the name The Owl?
The sheriff and the detective exchanged a look. The sheriff shook his head.
She's all business, this one,
said the sheriff. I told you, replied Marsh. Madeline didn't say a word. She waited patiently, awkwardly, yet characteristically, for their response. The sheriff eased back in his chair, as if ready to express some big revelation. Madeline already knew most of what he was about to say, but she humored him by feigning ignorance. She had learned a long time before she joined the FBI that if you really want to know the truth, you don't have to say anything. You just have to listen long enough, and eventually people will tell you everything you want to hear.
I did,
said the sheriff. The admission didn't catch either of them off guard. The sheriff continued.
I did, and I've regretted it ever since the words slipped out of my mouth.
Why?
asked Madeline.
Willie told you about the arm, right?
asked the sheriff.
Yes, Detective Marsh informed me about the recovered appendage,
replied Madeline.
The arm,
said the sheriff.
The arm,
she confirmed.
Well, you all have gotten our case reports. I didn't fall with yesterday's rain. I know you've seen the photographs, the bones. That arm was the first real piece of flesh that we've gotten since this thing started, whenever it started. But these bones, the way he arranges them, the way he discards them.
The sheriff stopped for a second to collect his thoughts. Madeline had, in fact, seen the photographs back in Virginia. A pile of bones tied up neatly inside of a plain cotton bedsheet, fastened together with a single length of packaging twine, and a sundry collection of seemingly random items, mostly trash.
You know, owls don't hardly make any noise. They swoop in real quiet like, and unless they call out, unless they make it a point to proclaim themselves, you'd never even know they were there. And then, the only thing they leave behind, the only testament to their killing, are these little balls of bones that they drop out of their backsides. They call them owl pellets. Whatever they eat, whatever they kill, it comes out in a mess of hair and grass and debris, all rolled up in a ball. Now, if you break it open, and if you look closely enough, you can almost put it all back together. But that doesn't change the fact that all you have is a pile of bones, and the owl is long gone.
You think he's eating them?
asked Madeline.
Well, I don't know what he's doing to them. None of our preliminary or forensics could find anything to indicate cannibalism. But there's also nothing they could find to definitively rule it out. So, we're still entertaining the idea. Regardless, we believe it does involve food, to a degree.
Because of the garbage?
said Madeline.
Yeah, it's all food wrappers, nutritional labels, salt packets, weird shit.
Define weird,
said Madeline.
I mean, most serial killers won't leave us a mountain of evidence and packaging labels. This kind of shit is what's going to get him caught. But he doesn't care,
said the sheriff. He doesn't care about the items. The bones are a different story, said the detective coldly. A shiver ran through Madeline. No matter how tough she may have seemed, she was still human. She was still affected by the grim details of cases like this one, even though, by all accounts, there had never been a case like this one. But, again, she already knew that. She read the case file.
The bones are so perfectly preserved. It's like the guy's a taxidermist or a coroner or something, not a hunter. Nah, hunters don't go to this length. These bones were boiled, bleached, cured, treated. This guy was. He's
methodical?
Asked Madeline.
Crazy,
replied the sheriff.
That's not a word we typically use in the Bureau,
said Madeline.
Well, we use it here,
said the sheriff. Madeline registered the comment and continued.
How do you think he's doing it?
Asked Madeline. Acid, we think, replied Detective Marsh. Once again, the comment didn't sit well with Madeline. The word acid made her stomach curl. She could usually control herself, but there was something oddly dissimilar about this case. Something imperceptible and hard to grasp, deeply personal.
Yeah, some of the burns uncovered by the coroner's office indicate some form of acid, but you'll have to ask Dusty about that one when you go down to get a look at the arm.
They've come up with a lot, huh?
Asked Madeline. Dusty's the best, said Detective Marsh.
Yeah, he's too damn good if you ask me. Too many ideas, that guy. Always trying to play detective,
said the sheriff. Isn't that his job? Asked Marsh.
His job is to get us usable evidence, not theories. That man's got too big of an imagination to be objective,
said the sheriff. He's a smart cookie, I'll give you that, said Marsh.
Either way, this is her investigation now,
said the sheriff, ushering toward Madeline.
Leave me and my department out of it. That's what all this transparency mess is all about anyway. We never withheld nothing to begin with. We just kept it quiet until we had more than 2 crime scenes to corroborate. Now I've got everyone from Internal Affairs to 60 Minutes climbing up my ass looking for a quote about corruption.
The sheriff sucked his teeth with an audible pop.
Corruption. Do you believe that?
Asked the sheriff.
I've been serving this community for 35 years. Hell, I was born here, and these news people have the nerve to act like I'm some carpetbagger or Barney Fife.
Madeline didn't respond. She didn't think his little rant sought an answer. Whether it was rhetorical or not, we'll never know. The sheriff stared at her for a moment, studying her reaction.
You know how many homicides my department handled last year? 11. This guy has killed 7 girls in the last 7 years. 8 if we ever find that poor Avellino girl. I tell you, these serial killers get all the headlines. But most people have no idea how many women go missing every year. These girls are just a drop in the bucket. As it is, I have no more manpower to cover this case, especially considering the recent developments in the Wynn girl.
You mean the arm?
Asked Madeline.
You didn't tell her?
Asked the sheriff. We didn't quite get that far, said Detective Marsh. The sheriff and detective exchanged a serious look. Madeline looked back and forth between them both, realizing that a genuine revelation was finally forthcoming. She prepared herself for what she was about to hear when the sheriff leaned in over his desk, getting closer to Madeline.
Now, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this office, and it certainly doesn't leave this precinct. Obviously, I can't stop you from telling your bosses in Washington or Virginia, or wherever the hell, but after our last media frenzy, I couldn't afford for this little bit of information to get out until your arrival,
muttered the sheriff in a low tone.
Charlie Wynn's last phone call only lasted about 15 seconds before the car accident. However, before she died, she revealed one thing. The man who stopped her was a cop.
Madeline didn't know what to say. This time it wasn't purposeful or by design. She simply was at a loss for words. Chapter 4. Charlie Wynn. Kali Wynn was the first and only daughter born to her refugee parents in the fall of 1979. The South Vietnamese couple had been hesitant to conceive in the early 70s due to the ever-changing political situation inside of their fragile government. And when the administration of Nguyen Van Thu fell to the communists, her family was fortunate enough to flee the country before the complete dissolution of the city of Saigon. As the city fell, Kali's parents were one of the final helicopters to take off from Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base before the rest of their countrymen were left to fend for themselves. Her mother, Hin Lan, had waited so long to start a family that by the time they were settled in Southern California, they feared it was too late to have a baby. When their daughter was born in September of '79, they both considered it such a miracle that they believed it was only appropriate to give her a name that honored her serendipitous conception. They chose the name Kali, which meant first beauty. However, it wouldn't be long until young Western classmates had renamed her altogether from Kali to the anglicized Charlie. She had been Charlie since kindergarten, but to her loving parents, their one and only child would always be their Kali, their first and most beautiful. Charlie Wynn was in her junior year at UCLA when she decided to go skiing that day. She had gone a few times when she was a child, so when a handful of her white friends convinced her to go, she reluctantly tagged along. Her parents had always instilled in her a sense of independence, so she decided to drive her car by herself that day, against the wishes of her schoolmates. Had she carpooled with them, she'd still be alive. The resort they went to was a small series of mountains known collectively as Mountain High. Each peak had once been its own independent, family-owned operation until one company bought all three of the mountains to form a singular resort. The bucolic town of Wrightwood sat just a few miles to the southeast of the resort, split down the middle by the Angeles Crest Highway, which serpentined through the mountains from south of Palmdale, all the way to Cajon Pass. The journey was only 30 or 40 miles as the crow flies, but it could take hours of scenic driving to get through in the summer, and in the winter, large portions were completely impassable. A blizzard in February had blanketed the small hamlet with enough snow to bury most houses in their entirety. However, it was a week before St. Patrick's Day, and most of the snow in town had melted by now. The East Resort itself was already closed due to its positioning and proximity to the sun. As a result, Charlie and her friends found themselves at the West Resort on this particular day. This is all worth mentioning because, had she been at the East Resort, there's a greater chance that she would have driven home east on the ACH towards San Bernardino, instead of northwest on Pear Blossom. Had she gone in any other direction, she'd still be alive. After a long day of skiing, the evening had finally crept up on them. She decided to stay a few hours later with her friends than she had originally anticipated. Some of her insatiable schoolmates purchased night passes after the day was over, and decided to keep skiing under the stars. She remained behind with a few other girls, nursing her wounds at the quaint resort bar known only as the Foggy Goggle. The Goggle was situated at the bottom of 3 lifts and essentially serviced the entire small mountain from the bunny slopes to the Black Diamonds. Beyond the outdoor bar sat a modest lodge and adjoining restroom with a small chimney that billowed a single plume of smoke from its solitary stack. Near the first chairlift, an even more modest ski patrol hut was flanked on either side by the featureless, unpaved parking lot, which appeared like a pool of India ink surrounded by a sea of melting white. As the night grew darker, the air grew colder, and wet snow began to crisp beneath the touch of cumbersome boots.
Jesus, how do you wear these things?
Asked Charlie as she pulled at her rental boots.
I told you not to get rentals,
Said Betty.
Yeah, Char, if you're gonna come with us, you should just really get stuff.
Said Carissa. Charlie's friends were pretentious, but they meant well. Sometimes wealthy people suggest things that are completely sensible from a monetary standpoint, even though they're financially unattainable by most people's standards. That doesn't make them bad people. Other things made them bad people.
Ew, fuck, have you seen Randy? I think he's got the coke,
said Betty, rubbing her gums.
I think he got another run with Dieter,
said Carissa.
I can't do any more coke,
said Charlie.
I've got to study tonight.
You still driving back?
Asked Carissa.
Yeah, I really need to get in a full day tomorrow. I have that test on Monday,
said Charlie.
Boo, you're no fun. Stay, do coke with us,
said Betty. The bartender was midway through making a drink for another customer when he finally had enough of the conversation in front of him. Hey ladies, I noticed you talking a little loud over here. Can I get you a couple of drinks to quiet things down?
That would be so tight,
said Carissa. The bartender promptly placed 3 shots on top of the bar and immediately began pouring around for the rambunctious group.
Drinks?
Said Betty.
Hell yeah, biatch.
Guys, I really need to go,
said Charlie.
No, come on, we have plenty of room at my stepdad's cabin,
replied Betty.
Just stay with us for tonight.
Yeah, stay with us,
repeated Carissa. The 2 girls held up their shot glasses, signaling her to grab her glass. She reluctantly threw back the mysterious concoction, gritting her teeth as the bottom shelf whiskey took effect.
Fuck. I shouldn't have done that,
said Charlie. The shot hit her almost instantly. She had been nursing a few drinks all day, but this seemingly insignificant shot was the one that did it. Yep, I'm drunk.
Hey look, it's Randy,
said Carissa.
Ah!
Screamed Betty. The 2 girls rose from their seats and charismatically greeted the 2 boys, Dieter and Randy. Carissa and Dieter were platonic, while Randy and Betty immediately started making out. All 4 of them had color-coordinated, brand-named outfits with customized, professionally fitted boots and designer sunglasses. Charlie was much more dressed down, wearing only black leggings and an off-white UCLA hoodie with a tiny cut in the neck, a symbol of her Valley Girl upbringing. She had a round face and large hooded eyes with 2 perfectly petite nostrils. Her tiny nose and subtle cheekbones gave her the appearance of still being a teenager, despite her best attempts to appear older, or simply her own age. She wore mascara and a bit of a smoky eye to seem more mature, but came off looking more like a scene girl than a grown woman. A single piercing in her nose matched her unkempt, messy ponytail, which she wore asymmetrically off to the one side. It seemed impromptu to the untrained eye, but, again, this was something learned, something adapted and evolved, an imprecisely precise technique that she picked up in the suburbs. After a brief moment of chit-chatting, the foursome made their way back over to Charlie. Yo, what's up, Charlie? We having some shots over here? Asked Randy. Barkeep, 5 more, huh?
Charlie, Hong Kong, Charlie. More sake bombs, Charlie?
Said Dieter, the resident racist. Charlie had heard this one before, and usually she would stomach it with a bit more grace, but she was just tipsy enough that she had absolutely zero tolerance for prejudice masquerading as comedy. She reared back and kicked him in the shins with her heavy ski boots. He was wearing boots as well, so the impact was drastically reduced, but he got the message.
Fuck you, Dieter,
said Charlie.
Oh, shit. What the hell, Charlie?
Cried Dieter.
You're such a dick, Dieter,
said Carissa. Yeah, Dietz. Hong Kong? She's Japanese, bro, replied Randy.
Babe, she's Vietnamese,
said Betty. Randy was incredulous, as if he couldn't believe he was being questioned. He looked at Betty, then Charlie, then back to Betty. Babe, you know I'm not. You know I'm not. This is ridiculous. I fucking love Korean barbecue.
Baby, that's Korea. It's literally in the name,
said Betty. Fuck, whatever, dude. Char knows what I meant.
It's a totally different country,
said Betty.
Aren't you a geography major?
Asked Carissa.
It's okay,
said Charlie.
I like Korean barbecue too.
Randy considered this a great victory and a vindication of his character. Charlie cringed a little at his reaction, but was used to mitigating the feelings white people have about their own racial prejudice. You see? That's why I fuck with you, Char. You're not about the bullshit, said Randy. The bartender had already poured 5 new shots for the group. Charlie hadn't even noticed until the drink was in her hand, and before she knew it, they were all raising their glasses. You're the fucking tits, bro, Randy continued. To Charlie! To Charlie! Cried the rest of the group, as well as the friendly bartender. Their glasses clinked together, and suddenly, Charlie was a little bit more drunk. All right, I'm going back to the car for a little. Randy gestured toward his nostril. Who's coming with me?
Me!
Said Betty, Carissa, and Dieter in unison. You hanging back, Charlie? Asked Randy.
Nah, I was actually getting ready to go,
Said Charlie. You're leaving? No way. Betty's stepdad's place has plenty of room. Just stay with us for the night, said Randy. Before she could respond, the self-assured foursome had already sauntered off to the parking lot in search of more powder. Charlie was left to her thoughts. In the distance, man-made snow began to fall from the tremendous turbines that were positioned parallel with the chairlifts. The brightness of the stars and the moon was diminished by the powerful buzzing of giant spotlights, which speckled the mountain with just enough light to see the trails. Far off, tiny specks carved wide, S-shaped patterns and novel lines across the ancient, indelible landscape. You heading back to LA tonight? Asked the bartender.
Yeah, thinking about it.
Replied Charlie. UCLA?
Yeah, back to Westwood.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what. If you're in a hurry and you don't want to hit a bunch of city traffic, I would just take the back way home. That's what most of the locals up here do anyway, if we're heading down. Just take a left when you get out of here instead of a right, then go up the hill for about 100 yards. Then there's a turnoff that heads south. It's a little bit winding, but it's a beautiful drive. It's called Largo Vista.
Largo Vista, huh?
Charlie liked the sound of that. The back way.
Thanks for the advice.
Sure thing, said the bartender. Charlie made sure that her friends were far out of sight before she made her escape. She eased her way off of the bar stool and slipped silently through the modest lodge. Well, as silently as possible, despite the loud clunk-clunking of her boots. Each boot hit the ground twice with every step, once at the heel and once at the toe. She walked past a single fireplace before she re-emerged into the night at the entrance to the rental area. The alcohol was really hitting her as she removed the impossibly stiff boots. The person at the rental office who held the carbon copy of her admission waiver could tell that she wasn't fit to ski. Driving, however, was a different story. By the time Charlie was done, she stepped out of the rental area just in time to run into Randy. Whoa, Char, you out of here? Asked Randy.
Yeah.
Replied Charlie, half asleep. You're good to drive, right?
Yeah, I think.
You think, huh? Asked Randy. Here, I got you. Hold out your hand. Charlie was so out of it that she obliged him before she even contemplated what use he might have for her hand. Before she could think to retract it, Randy had already carefully placed a small bump of cocaine on the inside of her right thumb.
God damn it, Randy.
I'm telling you, dude, it'll straighten you up.
I'm not going to do it.
Just do it,
Fine.
said Charlie, giving in to the peer pressure one last time. All right, see you on Monday, Char. Drive safe, yelled Randy. Off in the distance, her other friends chimed in.
Bye, Char,
they yelled in unison. Charlie paid them little mind. She was a strange blend of drunk and high. Her recently liberated legs were doing the walking for her. She walked with boundless determination, like only a drunk or an addict could do. With every step, her body and legs moved, but her eyes and head remained fixed, her eyes never blinking. She was already exiting the resort and waving goodbye to an employee at the gate before she had even buckled her seatbelt. She remembered to turn left as she exited the mountain and began her trek down Angeles Crest Highway. Fortunately for her, she was only on the road for a few hundred feet before she came to her turnout. She yielded as she made the comfortable right turn onto Largo Vista, never realizing that had she done anything else, had any number of different things happened or events taken place, then she would still be alive. Then again, if Charlie Wind hadn't died, someone else would have gone missing. We'll never know all the women who lived because another died in their place. Charlie almost immediately regretted her decision to take the advice of the bartender. The road was so winding that she nearly vomited from all the turns, and it was so dark that she didn't get to enjoy any scenery, just an endless maze of jersey walls, careening metal, and 1,000 feet drops. As she made her way down, she could see less and less snow as the ice-covered world melted away to reveal nothing but the emptiness of the desert night. She was at 5,000 feet now, according to a sign up ahead, though it provided little assurance. As she raced around the next turn, she found that the curve never seemed to end. The turn was so sharp and the angle was so steep that her wheels began to fishtail at the end of the turn, skidding off the road for a second before regaining traction. The sudden weightlessness was terrifying.
Fuck that bartender,
said Charlie. Just as the snow recedes and disappears at lower elevations, so does new vegetation seem to appear as you transition from mountain to desert. The temperature had already risen a few degrees, and to her side, a small meadow was dotted with strange spindly cacti that resembled a ginger root. For a second, the light of the moon illuminated the tiny field before another column of rock obscured it from vision. She went up, then down, and back around before she emerged through another clearing. As she passed through the last canyon, the world seemed to open up before her as the columns of limestone fell away to the sand. Suddenly, she could see tiny lights speckled across the valley of the desert. She passed a tiny, out-of-service diner as she eased her way onto the home stretch. The mile-high cafe looked down at her as she went roaring past in a blur. She was low enough now that the radio suddenly came screaming back to life. Differences by Genuine was playing. It made her jump.
My whole life has changed,
sang the R&B singer. The final 4,000 feet of Largo Vista was a straight shot from the foothills of the San Gabriels to the vast expanse of the high desert. Because the street continually descends into the valley, the portion of Largo Vista that lies beyond Pear Blossom seemed to extend forever into the horizon, like an arrow pointing perfectly north. Far off in the distance, another set of mountains appeared to blend with the sky as the gradient of night climbed its peaks. As she pulled up to the stoplight for Pear Blossom, she looked left, then right. She knew that she needed to go west in order to get home, but she was so drunk that she forgot which way she was going. Had she accidentally gone right, she would have taken Pear Blossom southeast until she reached the I-15, and we never would have heard about her. Instead, she went left. Something caught her eye in the rearview mirror as she made the left turn. Behind her, off to her driver's side, an old building sat near the road. It was dilapidated and in complete disrepair, but it seemed to watch her as she drove away. Charlie wrote it off to drunken paranoia and turned her attention back to the road ahead. Farther up ahead, around the next turn, a curious light in the road made her ease onto her brakes. As she came to a stop, the police lights turned on. It was hard to say what it was, but her drunken mind immediately came to a conclusion. It's a DUI checkpoint.
Oh, fuck,
said Charlie. Just then, the flashlight illuminated the cabin from the side. Charlie jumped at the sight of the piercing flashlight, but the shadowy figure remained motionless. Charlie, fearing the worst and knowing that she was still drunk, did her best to comply. She quickly rolled down the window.
Evening, office.
License and registration, ma'am?
I'm sorry, was I speeding?
No, ma'am. DUI checkpoint. The comment came as a crushing blow to Charlie. She tensed up, but did her best to lie. Have you been drinking this evening? Asked the policeman.
No, sir.
Where are you coming from?
Wrightwood?
Said Charlie. The officer stopped, as if he heard something that he did or didn't like. His posture seemed to relax as he prepared to speak again. Step out of the vehicle, ma'am. Charlie complied. She promptly stepped out of the vehicle, doing her best to hide her lack of balance. Spread 'em, said the officer.
Excuse me?
Asked Charlie. Before she could get the words out, the officer had already spun her around and forced her hands onto the hood of the vehicle. He spun her so fast that she never really got a chance to see his face. Less than a split second had gone by when he suddenly and forcefully reached down between her knees and pried her legs apart in a single motion. The entire movement was so foreign and abrupt that it should have knocked her off of her feet, but her body pantomimed compliance so well that she moved with him in perfect lockstep, as if she had always known what he meant when he said, "Spread 'em." Charlie was willing to say anything to avoid a ticket.
Please, sir, I wasn't drinking, I swear.
"Shh, shh," said the policeman, hushing her. She was turned away, so she couldn't see him, but she suddenly felt him moving around her, as if trying to get a better view. After an uncomfortable few seconds, he began to perform a standard pat-down, only slower. Starting at her feet, he slowly caressed her ankle and calf as he patted up the inside of her thigh toward her vagina. He stopped at just shy of her genitals, which was fairly typical, had it not been for the slow, measured movements of his hands. Something didn't feel right, but, again, she wrote it off as drunken paranoia. Every time something started to feel really wrong, he stopped just soon enough to keep her guessing. Is he really a cop? At each hallmark point, her ankle, her calf, the inside of her knee, the base of her pelvis, his hand lingered just a moment longer than it should have, a moment longer than normal. When he started to repeat the same motion on the other side, the situation shifted. Behind her, she was suddenly aware of the excited breaths of the policeman. As his left hand began to make its way up her leg, he stopped patting altogether. He drug his hand in one continuous move from her heel to her thigh, stopping just shy of her labia. As he lowered his hand, she could feel the tip of his finger outline the ridge of her underwear through her leggings. She couldn't believe what was happening. She tried to remain sensible.
Are you going to breathalyze me?
Asked Charlie, nervously. I thought you said you weren't drinking, asked the policeman. Charlie didn't know what to say. The man continued his stop and frisk routine, getting friskier by the moment. He bent down, as if he spotted something irregular. She could feel his face get closer. What have we got here? The man suddenly grabbed her with his open hand by the entirety of her vagina. He grabbed it in such a way that her two legs felt like the opposite ends of a scale, while the rest of her body was balancing on the ends of his fingers. Charlie's voice was immediately caught in her throat. Naturally, instinctively, she moved to bring her legs back together, but a sudden jerking of his hand stopped her in her place. With her legs still spread apart, she no longer felt like her feet were in contact with the ground. She floated like one of those decorative porcelain birds that balance perfectly on their beak, never touching the ground. Said the policeman, as he slowly started rubbing her vagina through her pants. The feeling was horrible at first, but her senses didn't block it out altogether. After another moment, she could feel her body begin to change, opening up, and she was suddenly sick to her stomach. The physiological processes taking place were in complete opposition to her mental state. A single tear started to form in her eye as she processed what was happening to her. Charlie's drunken compliance was suddenly replaced by abject fear and the unquenchable desire for liberation. Her eyes began feverishly looking for answers while the rest of her body remained completely still. She steeled herself, mentally preparing for what was to come. As she blinked, a single tear ran down her face. I've never had an Asian, said the policeman. Charlie suddenly picked up her foot and brought it down as hard as she could on the officer's toes. He called out in pain as she smashed his foot, then lunged forward for the door handle. He was on her in a second, smashing her into the vehicle with all of his force, while her hands clumsily reached for the handle. His massive arms clutched around her, placing her into a bear hug before ripping her away from the vehicle. Fortunately, Charlie grabbed just enough of the door handle that it flung open as he pulled her back. The sudden swing of the door knocked him off balance, and she slipped from his grasp as he fell to the ground. Both scrambled to their feet at about the same time. Charlie reached into the driver's side of the vehicle a moment ahead of her attacker, but there wasn't nearly enough time to start the engine and close the door. She was reaching for something when she suddenly felt her whole body get ripped back into the night. Charlie landed with a thud, clutching at her shoulder in pain. He stepped over her, straddling Charlie as he bent down towards her face. The stoic man appeared to be confident as he moved in for the kill, when he suddenly took stock of Miss Wynn's mutually assured expression. For a woman who was about to die, she seemed entirely too pleased, equally as confident as the killer was himself. What was she hiding? A wry smile appeared across her face as she let go of the shoulder she had been clutching. In her hands, she had been holding her keys ever since she retrieved them, moments before. His slight slip-up had allowed her just enough time to grab them, and more importantly, the mace attached to the keychain. The shocked policeman didn't have enough time to react. Charlie popped the cap off and began liberally spraying him in the face with the non-lethal composition. She rose to her feet, still spraying him, as he cowered to his knees beneath the blinding torrent. His screams were audible for miles. The policeman was screaming and clutching his eyes when Charlie turned to flee. Suddenly, his hand reached out and grabbed her right by the ankle, tripping her up. She fell to the ground and immediately turned over to face the man. The blinded creature no longer looked human. He pulled at her feet, trying to mount her and regain dominance. Charlie tried everything she could to crawl away, but his grip was too strong. In a last-ditch effort, she recoiled her leg and lashed out twice, kicking him squarely in the face before he could get on top of her. The man was still conscious. She pushed him off, but only barely. He put up no more effort as she moved to enter the vehicle's driver's side. As she pressed the keys into the ignition, he was suddenly up again, banging on her driver's side window. She ignored his pleas and placed the transmission into drive. As she pressed down on the accelerator, the policeman got off one more shot, punching the window so hard that the glass shattered all over her as the car lurched away. She could see him scramble off into the darkness in her rearview mirror. Then she never saw him again. She continued to look out of her back window, waiting to see headlights, ready for a chase. But there was nothing. After another second, the adrenaline of the moment had subsided, and she suddenly realized what she needed to do. She immediately sat forward, reaching for her cup holder. Inside was a lime green Nokia 5110. She dialed 911, but was surprised to hear no ringing. When she looked at the screen, she was dumbfounded by the message. No signal. She pressed on the accelerator as hard as she could, trying to put as much distance between her and her attacker as possible. Every few seconds, she looked back at her phone, hoping to regain a signal. Outside, the desert flew by at shocking speed, and it was only getting faster. 3 or 4 minutes flew by as she continued doing over 100 miles per hour. Her heart was still racing, and her hair was blowing all over the place as wind poured into the shattered window. She was holding the phone near the window with her left hand, while she drove with her right. Holding her arm out the window, she reached up towards the sky for a better signal, but it was no use. Suddenly, in the rearview mirror, she could see a pair of headlights in the distance. She wasn't sure if it was him, but the sight alone was enough to reignite her adrenaline. Her heart was pumping so loud that she didn't even notice the murmuring in her hand. It took her several seconds before the voice registered.
Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? This is 911 Emergency Services. Are you there?
Said the operator. Charlie's eyes went wide when she realized what was happening. She clutched the phone with her left hand as she pressed it up against her face.
Yes. Hello? Someone's chasing after me.
Calm down. Where are you?
I'm driving on Pear Blossom.
Are you safe?
I don't know. I think he's still behind me.
Charlie turned her head to see the headlights, but they were gone.
Ma'am, who's chasing you?
It's a cop.
Replied Charlie. As she turned her head back to face the road, her eyes went wide. In the process of looking over her shoulder, she had drifted into the other lane, right into oncoming traffic. She was promptly greeted by the front end of an 18-wheeler. The driver hadn't seen her coming either, so both cars were going over 80 miles per hour when they made impact. As her face and body made contact with the grille, the explosive force of her own car obliterated almost all that was left of her. As the two cars went flying by in a heap of sparks, flame, and twisted metal, a single piece of Charlie went flying in the other direction. By the time the 18-wheeler had finally stopped, it was more than 100 yards down the street. Along the shoulder of the road, right by the initial impact, her dismembered arm still clutched the green Nokia.
Hello? Hello? Ma'am? Are you still there?
Asked the operator. Chapter 5. Madeline Crowe. Madeline sat up in bed, roused from a nightmare. She immediately had no recollection of what the dream was about, not a single detail. For most people, that came as a gentle relief, not knowing what horrible image their own mind had just conjured up to scare them. But for some reason, it had the opposite effect on Madeline. She laid back down for a moment, trying to relive the awful struggle that she had just subconsciously escaped. But it was gone. The horrific details of such things made the average person squeamish or uncomfortable, but the holistic mind of Madeline Crowe took great solace in understanding every facet of a conflict, whether they were real or not. Thanks for listening. I hope you really enjoyed the first couple chapters of A Butterfly in the Dark. To hear the rest, go to Amazon now and purchase a copy of the audiobook, ebook, or the traditional paperback. And thanks again for listening. To learn more about the author, follow on social media on Instagram and TikTok at George Washington Skis. And once again, thanks for listening.